So, try and kick things off and get moving today. So, I must admit for me, it's the first time I've been involved in something like this, where we've got such a great group of panellists put together, and then to have the journalists in the room as well. It's just fantastic. And I know for the journalists in the room, you're not going to let me down today and not ask questions. We want lots of proactivity, lots of questions. It's a great opportunity to get a good feel for what's happening in the cyberspace. But firstly, I might just sit down. We don't want to make this too formal. We'll try and keep it pretty interactive. So my name is Carl Wernbel. I'm moderating today. I work as a principal advisor for Ecosystem. I'll explain a little bit about Ecosystem later on. My specific area is incident response. Some of you around the table know me and my history, some may not. But I had the sort of dubious honour of being involved in a fairly major security event back in 2011 for a business that I started, founded, owned, and had that business wiped out through a security event. I'm happy to answer questions as part of this as well, but that's sort of how I got into security. Unfortunately the wrong way, but I guess we get into businesses somehow. Like I said, I want to make things as interactive as possible. First of all, I just want to kick things off and introduce our speakers. So firstly, Michelle Price. Michelle, hand up over there. Michelle is the CEO of Aussie, which is the Australian Cyber Security Growth Network, part of the Australian Government's Industry Growth Centres Initiative. Did I get that right?
You did.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
It is.
All right, Jennifer Stockwell, hand up over there. Big hand up. Okay. Jennifer is a National Security Advisor for Telstra. Jennifer is an award-winning leader in cyber security and intelligence with over a decade of experience globally. Did we cover that? Okay. Probably a lot more there, isn't there? Next we have Michael Warnock. So Michael down the end of the table down there. And I'd like to thank Michael's business Aura for bringing this event together as well today. And Michael is the country manager for Aura Information Security. Michael's role sees him work alongside Australian organisations of all sizes to assess their cyber security and implement better controls. Michael's at the coalface, so he's often exposed to undisclosable risks and attacks facing many businesses. So great opportunity to speak to somebody that works with clients directly on a day-to-day basis. Ashish, hiding over here. Okay, Ashish, amongst a number of other roles, which I found out earlier, is also a security advisor to IoTSec Australia. Ashish is a major trusted advisor and cybersecurity professional with a strong motivation to prove security adds value to and enables business strategy. He is currently a security advisor to IoTSec Australia, an industry startup initiative to raise awareness and promote secure practices in the IoT ecosystem. So this is a voluntary role for Ashish, and just on our discussions earlier on, I think he's got a lot of good insights for us today around the IoT sector. So the format for today, once I finish yapping on for a few minutes, each speaker will then get their turn to do a bit of an intro and to let us know how they are seeing the Australian security landscape. But part of this session today will be also us as part of the Ecosystem group, just to explain a little bit around what we've seen from our cyber research study as well. It's gone out to over 1,100 companies across Asia Pacific. Ecosystem is a private equity-backed digital research and advisory platform. We provide a web and app-based platform that gives tech buyers free to view data to benchmark themselves and support their technology decision making. For tech vendors, we provide access to real-time customisable primary market data to support their sales, marketing and leadership teams. We're headquartered in Singapore with offices in Sydney and India, and industry-leading analysts participating from all over the world. It's very much a disruptor in the space as well, and certainly looking to go head-to-head against some of the big research firms. But today, bringing together the industry-leading group of panellists working across cyber, and as you know, it's a very broad topic, and I'll A lot of businesses are having a lot of trouble trying to navigate their way through cyber, understand where to start in a lot of cases, or certainly how to manage the risks. We had a good discussion with Michelle earlier on today about businesses trying to navigate through the landscape, so Michelle can elaborate on that a little bit today. But some of the topics that we'll cover today, but really, like I said, it's a bit of a free-for-all. Ask any questions you like, but certainly some of the sort of prepared topics in line with the press release that's going out today. First of all, Australian businesses simultaneously leaders and laggards when it comes to cyber readiness and resilience. In the ecosystem research that we conducted, we noted that 42% of large enterprises report having mature security programs, as opposed to only 7% of SMEs in Australia. So a lot of enterprise, particularly in the smaller end of town, are really struggling to get a handle on security. What's driving the spend in security, cyber security right now amongst Australian businesses? Research has shown that security has largely been driven by risk management programs, project requirements, or compliance. That's the top three responses. More specifically, project requirements such as DX, IoT and AI at 75%, industry compliance 73%, and risk management 62%. So we're still being driven largely by those areas within security. And some of the other areas like responding to incidents or just general preparedness, they're still lagging behind. So where is investment going right now in security, and where are the gaps? While investment in security is still largely around network and infrastructure, we're still seeing people still protecting the perimeter, no matter how much we talk about it. Application security at 65%, messaging security 59%. But we are, as we head towards 2020, we are seeing a growth specifically in security operations. 34% of respondees said that they're looking towards security ops spend into the new year. Threat intelligence as well at 26%, and data or information security at 24%. So we are seeing people start to get their heads around being a little bit more proactive in those spaces. I have to mention IoT in here, of course. We'll cover that in detail today, but the Ecosystem IoT study, we had a specific study around IoT, reveals that the top global challenges for IoT deployments are integration or tech standards at 57%, security at 56%, upfront costs at 55%. In Australia, the biggest challenge for IoT deployments is regulatory compliance at 53%, followed by integration and security challenges. We wouldn't see that at all, would we, Michelle?
Just every day.
Just every day, that's right. We also cover navigating the regulatory regimes for compliance. 13% of SMEs in Australia acknowledged that in spite of the stringent compliance environment, they do not follow any country or industry compliance laws. And in many cases, a lot of the SMEs I've spoken to don't even really understand what security is or what requirements are in security. It's quite amazing. We also cover the geo-strategic drivers threat landscape right now for Australian businesses and what's coming up. How to seize commercial opportunities. This one's a little bit precious to me. It's using security as a sales enabler. We'd like to have some discussion around that as well. And I think ANZ Bank, from memory, might have been the first cab off the rank for that when they had their Falcon program a few years ago around credit card. They're actually using security to sell product. But not a lot of organisations are embracing that in great degree at the moment. What an immediate action plan for Australian cyber resilience might look like. So the urgency is there. Enterprises putting pressure on SMEs to improve their security, especially managed service providers. I'm seeing certainly from our side, getting a lot of inquiries from managed service providers and now getting pressured from particularly their enterprise clients about improving their security programs. And a lot of them are fairly early stage in that maturity. All right, that's enough of me waffling on to start up. But like with all panelists today, if you've got any questions with myself, please least fire away. So now I'm just going to hand over one by one to our panellists, and we'll start off with Michelle Price.
Thanks so much, Carl. So colleagues, what I'm going to focus on in my remarks is around this regulatory and legislative environment. Some of you at the table know that this is an issue that's pretty close to me, as it is close to our sector. For those who don't know me, I do have an opinion on everything, so you are able to ask me any question and I will be able to answer it in detail as much time as we've got. But I wanted to focus my remarks around my quite significant and deep concern about the landscape that is facing not just the economy and sort of how the cybersecurity sector has the opportunity to grow across our economy, because that's actually my day job, is to grow the Australian cybersecurity sector, but also how the regulatory and legislative landscape is looking internationally. That is actually, in my view, working against our ability to achieve the mission that some of that legislation and regulation is supposed to be supporting. And of course, growing a sector is all about making sure that the economy is a resilient, cyber resilient economy, and also then making sure that we can be globally competitive in what is a shrinking world. And so right now what we are facing is a whole series of legislation, regulation, standards and guidance that is causing extreme confusion across the economy. And this is from the conception that, of course I would say this, but it is actually factually true, that cybersecurity and therefore cyber resilience is the true horizontal sector of the economy. It does touch every single part of the economy. And we're not conceiving of legislation, regulation, standards and guidance with that in mind. So that does mean that all of the sector-specific legislation and regulation, standards and guidance has impact for cybersecurity and vice versa. But then of course we are also in a situation where cybersecurity from a federal government perspective is conceived of within the framing of national security. And we've got a whole series of legislation that has emerged over the past 2 years, and there will be more to come, that is adding and compounding that confusion for organisations who are really at the very, very beginning of their cybersecurity journey in Australia. And so yes, we do have that sensitive topic. I'm happy to bring it out right up front. The thing that you might know is referred to as the AA Bill. It is no longer the AA Bill because it did pass into legislation. It is now the TOLA Act. And the TOLA Act attracted a huge amount of attention at the end of last year and still continues to do so. But it is but one of a series of 10 pieces of legislation and regulation that impact directly Australia's cybersecurity. We also then have a whole series of standards and guidance that are emerging that are sector-specific, impacting cybersecurity. APRA's CPS 234 is the most recent version of regulation and standards that are impacting, and now I think that's a positive example in my own view. But in terms of how all of these things come together, of course, out in the wild, this thing that we call the economy, where cybersecurity and cyber resilience is actually highly contextual. The way in which cybersecurity plays out is different from one moment to the next, from one incident to the next, from one subsector and sector to the next. One organisation at the low end of the scale to the high end of the scale. Everything is highly contextual for cyber. We're not taking an approach at a whole of economy level. It's not just the politicians or the bureaucrats. It's also industry and academia are not taking a holistic picture, in my view, of what all of the interdependencies and intersections of all of this landscape is. So what are the impacts for economic competitiveness in all of this? How much are we losing from the innovation side of things and commercialisation opportunities by having unknown and untold unintended consequences that are coming from what is a train smash of a legislative landscape? Now, to be clear, friends, this is not intentional. Of course, our legislators and regulators don't want to provide an environment that makes us less competitive globally and undermines the security of our nation. That is not, of course, what they're intending on doing. But we are in such a rapidly moving and evolving space in technology, with cybersecurity at its very heart, that we are not taking a breath to understand what the broader implications are and whether or not we are indeed able from a technological point of view, let alone a human point of view, to be able to understand what these intersections are. So in my view, we actually need a strategic approach to all of this, and understand that at the end of the day, what the job of the economy is to do is to provide benefit to Australians, not to other countries, not to service free trade agreements, not to service alliances, but to actually service the Australian community. I'm not sure that we have that front of mind anymore when we look at the confluence of all of this landscape, notwithstanding the fact that it doesn't take account of whether or not we have a business that is a sole trader, right through to the largest employer of the country, which happens to be the Department of Defence, and everyone in between. So we have an environment here that is highly complex, but we've created it. It's not just the government, it's not just industry, it's not just academia and the researchers, it's all of us. We've created this environment, which of course means that we can empower ourselves to do better. And I really do genuinely think that Australia is well positioned to be able to do this and show a better way for the rest of the world. We've not gone too far down the path with a lot of this, but we need to understand the context. We need to understand that there are differences, for example, in financial services. Financial services is not a closed book. And no, I'm not just picking on financial services because we've had a Royal Commission. Although what are the cyber implications of the Royal Commission? There has been no public discussion about that. So I think I'll finish my remarks by saying that ultimately what we're in the game of now, more than anything else, is one that does not have a perimeter. We're also in a game where we have complex and dynamic supply chains and also value chains in play. And this is all in the environment where we have people who don't know how to trust each other anymore. Underpinning all of this is our ability or otherwise to choose to trust, but do we actually know what the definition of trust is anymore? So I do believe that we need to take a pause and understand the legislative, regulatory standards and guidance environment that we've created for cybersecurity, but also for the rest of the economy, knowing that cybersecurity is the true horizontal, and recognise that yes, we have made a few mistakes. We've also had some really good wins. But let's evolve it because we actually can't continue the way it is now. I'll conclude my remarks there. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm quite impressed, actually.
We clap. I suggest you have another drink.
I thought you said you'd have opinions.
All right, thank you, Michelle. I'll hand over to Ashish now for his introductory remarks.
Hello everyone, Ashish, and I'll be talking about IoT and where is IoT heading, the legislations in IoT, why it's becoming more and more common, what's the growth of IoT, and the risks we have that's just becoming bigger and bigger for the community and as well as for the businesses and consumers from IoT point of view. So it's I think that's pretty much what I'm going to talk about. Saving some time from giving some time back to Carl on yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. All right, I'd like to I'll hand over now to Jennifer. Sorry, Jennifer, in your middle. Take a pause for a second. I'm sorry, Michael had a mouthful as well.
So, good afternoon everyone, Michael Warnock, I'm the Country Manager for Aura. So firstly, thank you for the chance to spend some time with you this afternoon. I know everyone's got crazy schedules, so a couple of minutes for me, more on the narrative of what we're seeing as a partner with many organisations in market. We work with organisations anything from small size through to large scale in the public and private sector. And my observation is that we're at a fork in the road. There's a great opportunity for organisations to grow, not only in the Australian market, but internationally on the back of digital transformation and the world that we're now operating. But unfortunately for many of them, cybersecurity is still seen as a handbrake inside their business and not the accelerator. And what I mean by that is there's a degree of complacency and there's a degree of confusion in the market. And if we look at the top end of town, those ASX listed 100, 200 organisations, many of them have got a really strong cyber resiliency capability. The challenge is for the market is those small to medium-sized businesses. They underpin our GDP. They are the breadth and depth of our country's operations. These organisations are struggling with the notion of cybersecurity. They're struggling with it for many reasons. In particular, they're still trying to run their business on a day-to-day basis, but now we've got this new thing over the horizon called cybersecurity. They're complacent in that they feel that the cybersecurity risk will be to the company down the road. It won't happen to me. That head in the sand approach. They're also confused as well because they don't know where to go to and who to talk to actually get the advice to help them move forward. So there's, on both of those fronts, a great opportunity. I see too many conversations that cyber risk is still seen as an IT problem inside organisations. It's not. And until we get to a point where cyber becomes part of a company's DNA, that everybody from the top of their business to the bottom of their business understands what cyber risk is, you're not going to move the needle. The other observation I see also is that organisations are trying to build what I call the infinite wall, and that is I need to block everything. The bad guys will never get in. Unfortunately, as we know, it's a race. Today we're ahead, the bad guys are ahead. Next day we're ahead, then the bad guys are ahead. So we've got to also get the acceptance that from time to time, bad is going to happen to my business, but it's about what do I do when that happens? How do I actually rectify my business? How do I acknowledge what's going on? So for us, the focus needs to be in three areas. It's not technology. Technology for many organisations has been the go-to. It's about people, process and technology. And investment and focus needs to be in those three areas, and the investment and focus in those three areas needs to be equal. If you don't have it equal, then you're going to literally have a spinning wheel. So my role is to help organisations on the journey. The opportunity for us in market is to educate companies on what cyber resiliency is about and why it's important to their business, but to make sure that they're focused on the people, process and technology requirements on building cyber resiliency. As I said at the open, there's a great opportunity for us in Australia to compete not only locally but internationally. We're seeing many organisations accelerating those digital transformation programs that they're on, but they must ensure that cybersecurity is one of those top 3 programs of work that they have inside their business, and they'll only help accelerate what they are doing locally and internationally. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry, Jennifer.
Oh, I can speak now. That's okay. Sorry. So I will go a little bit to where I see the global threat landscape and probably then bring that back a bit to regulation as well. And my take on this is always going to be from a national security and security of critical infrastructure perspective. That's my background, and I have a team of specialists in Telstra led by both our own executives and our CEO leadership team and our board and government policy makers, and then right down to the engineers who are building our networks on what is technically possible in terms of protecting against cyber threat, what's legal and what's acceptable. So there's a lot of that kind of what's acceptable to an everyday Australian in terms of what's right to do and find that balance. So a little bit on trends and kind of things that keep me awake at night, I suppose. What we see, sophistication in targeting, and you hear a lot about this, about sophisticated threat actors. To me, sophistication is not just using amazing tools all the time and using amazing techniques and really hitting those hardest networks. It's using the right tool for the job, and it's the fact that the attacker, and this, I'm going to generally talk about the attacker, not the financially motivated, although it kind of applies too, but also the nation state. The attacker has a strategy. They have KPIs. They have someone standing behind them saying, whether kind of virtually or really, saying, this is your objective. So when we are thinking about how do we protect our data and how do we run our security programs, we need to not just be thinking about the perimeter, as some have some of you have mentioned, we need to be thinking, okay, traditionally I kind of assume that it's my data that's under threat, that it's my, it's my customers' credit card details that are under threat. Let's take a step back and look at what are our other sort of geopolitical powers. What do they care about? Is it innovation in technology? Is it what's the state of the network? And when we look back into our risk and security program, are we actually protecting the information that they would most value? And is our value assessment matching what they would most value? And have we got our security right in that? So I have those kind of conversations every day with our engineers and trying to help them to understand that yes, we hear a lot in the media about data breach, but it's not just about confidentiality, it's about integrity of systems and services. It's about availability and the impact of a cyber attack if that was to affect the availability of those critical services. Just those everyday services allow us to have a really smooth, frictionless user experience every day when we use our phone for every last thing that we're doing. I'm happy to go more into that as we go through the conversation. I think I'd also at this point like to make a bit of a point that contrary to what we are starting to see as the prevailing narrative, you will find in talking to big businesses who are all talking to each other, by the way, in our cybersecurity teams, that we really do care about the security of our customers and our systems and our services and our networks. And we're very willing to consult and to understand where government sees potentially the gaps in regulation and where they want to go with it, and to provide that balance as to what is technically possible and what would realistically have an impact for the security of the nation. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a narrative that would kind of suggest that industry is not thinking that way. I think you'll find that is there. What we really need is, we can't expect government to to keep up with the emerging technology, the pace and scale that technology and innovation is going. We can't expect governments in isolation to grapple with that. All of us who are in the sectors that are producing and innovating and building, we need to bring that expertise to the table and say this is what we can offer, and help governments and regulators to understand what they're dealing with. So we have an opportunity there, and if we can have a really early and effective two-way dialogue, hopefully we'll get to see, and I'd like to kind of make a prediction, but also it's kind of a hope that we will see what Michelle mentioned in terms of that bit more of a standardisation, perhaps, or kind of becoming more coherent across the regulation that there is, because there's only so much expertise actually that we can draw, so it will often be the same kind of people having the same conversations over and over, so we can maximise that expertise and kind of look across everything more strategically. I think that's a really important point. And yeah, I think the other thing that we will see increasingly, and a couple of the other speakers have touched on this, is moving more towards that risk-based approach than a compliance approach. And yes, that can be quite challenging and confusing, because it can be quite reassuring to have a checklist and feel that you've ticked everything off, but that's not the way that we're going to keep up with the volume and connectivity and emerging technology. We're going to have to stand back and make risk-based decisions. So that's why I think this is going. That's enough for now, I think. I'm happy to talk to IoT.
Thanks, Jennifer. As you can see from just the introduction, security is such a broad topic and it touches on so many areas. I certainly agree with Jennifer's comments there around the type of attacks. It's not just about stealing data. The incident that I went through was about availability. Somebody actually went after our operational systems and took down our core infrastructure. We didn't have one byte of data stolen from our system. It was a deliberate attempt to bring the company down. So it is quite broad. You know, it can attack in a number of different ways. But now that we've done the introductions and a very good cross section there that we've covered, we'll throw the floor open now. We want to keep this a very sort of general interactive discussion, and like I said, I'll be very disappointed if journalists don't speak up and ask lots of questions today. If I have to go to any of my go-tos, I'll be a bit disappointed. Anybody want to kick off and throw any questions around?
I'll start.
Far away.
Apart from the word cyber and IoT, we can include all of that 2 years ago. Doesn't that mean the industry is bad? I'm fiddly serious. I mean, it's about treating security as part of the business, as part of risk. It's not something that happens to someone else. You need processes, etc., etc., etc. I think we've all heard this message before.
From my lens, there are sections of the private and public sector who absolutely have taken some significant steps forward in building out their cyber security capability. You'll hear me talk a lot about cyber resiliency, and that's a lot of the metrics that I'll sort of look at. So absolutely, there's been some great steps forward. We are in a better spot than we were 5-10 years ago. And there's various factors for that. Some of it is driven through industry regulation, some of it's driven through government focus. Absolutely have seen a shift in cybersecurity awareness after the Turnbull legislation and focus around cybersecurity came in. As I touched on earlier though, there's still a void between what's good and what's bad. There is still a lot of work to be done. So in some areas, yeah, we are losing the fight. If you look at notifiable data breach reports every quarter, there's still lots of stuff in there about human error.
Yeah.
Problem. What have we got to do here? How do we actually move the needle around fixing someone clicking on something? So from my perspective, yes, we've taken steps forward. In some instances, we're neutral. In other areas, there's still work to be done.
I think to that point, it's possible, and I don't think we should be complacent here, but it's possible that we're not seeing the impact of some of the good work that is being done now. That impact will only come, that good work to bake security into applications and code. You won't see that sort of reducing the impact immediately, but you might start to see that we're moving ahead. I'm optimistic.
Things will take time, absolutely. We're seeing investment in STEM, the TAFE program, which is great. It's 2 years or so in its rollout. It's going to take time for that to happen. But again,
Some of us are getting old, Mark.
what day is it? We need to approach it that some things can be achieved very quickly. Some things are going to be of a longer burn, and we need to have investment, focus, and measurement in all of those areas.
I think there's also a couple of other things still that weren't in play 10 years ago. I'll say that there's 3 things in my view that weren't in play 10 years ago. One was IoT. Well, of course there was IoT, but we didn't conceive of it the way we do now, and certainly we didn't have the advent, or I guess the spread, we'll say the spread of smartphones and smart devices. I mean, everyone's got an Apple Watch now, or the equivalent, if you're a Garmin person, whatever. But you know, we didn't have those 10 years ago. We really didn't. And I think the second area that we didn't have 10 years ago was an understanding that this is something that has economic impact. It's not just national security impact. So 10 years ago, there was a sense that we had national security agencies working in conjunction with critical infrastructure organisations, whether they be public and private, but it was really seen to be their domain and nobody else's. Certainly in Australia. The rest of the world had started to figure out that yes, of course, these messages have ramifications for the average individual, but in Australia 10 years ago we didn't. I think the third component is that 10 years ago we really actually didn't have just as many dependencies as what we do now on apps. So the sort of sense of vulnerability to the broader society has actually spread through our dependency on applications, and what I guess all of us, it doesn't matter what generation we're part of, all of us depend on apps. We didn't have that 10 years ago. And so I think when you bring all of those things together, there's a landscape now that looks very, very different in reality to what we had 10 years ago. That means that people are just starting to figure out that this stuff does matter to them too. It's not just for government to sort out. So while the messaging was definitely there 10 years ago, we didn't have 24 million people listening to the fact that it impacts them too.
I'm only joking, but we did have the same slow broadband 10 years ago. It's faster now, I know, but yes, only just.
The media's been watching a Mack truck for a decade, and we got a report last week on to we knew was coming. So you know, can I pick up on I suppose in some ways still Garian's point, but is it a case of jolting everyone from a canter or from a trot into a canter? We've just sort of, the grinding movement has been sort of slow, but I think picking up on Michelle's thing, there is a sense of goodwill, but just not the pace. How do you sort of get that sense of urgency into the issue?
Just going to IoT security, I read this morning that at this Five Eyes meeting that's underway in the UK, Peter Dutton's saying that one of the focuses is IoT security. Now in the US there's a few bills being put up to legislate on IoT security. The UK has got a code of practice for home devices, which I think has become mandatory, I'm not sure. We don't seem to have much here except there's a code produced by the IoT Alliance, but I don't see the government has done very much on IoT security. Maybe someone could set me right on that, and maybe you could suggest what the government should be doing to do some issues on IoT security.
From an IoT point of view, as you rightly said, UK government, they've got code of practice.
And it's being expanded.
Yep, in code of practice they're covering three things, which is password, what should be the minimum security requirement for manufacturers, and who should be point of contact, and the patching. So that's UK, and definitely the California state, they're coming up with their IoT security minimum requirements starting 1st Jan 2020.
And there'll be some federal bills put up, I think, in the US also.
So and it's because the California state, their legislations are usually very strict. So what your trade businesses are doing, they want to put something else in place before this thing comes in picture. Because when California, this I think it's called SB 23 something, I can't exactly remember the number, but when it comes in place, the view is that this will be imposed across US, which is quite a strict law. Now the third thing is NIST. Now NIST is doing some work on this. So NIST got some directive to come. It's a two-stage approach. By 30th of September 2019, they need to come up with what is companies are doing for IoT cybersecurity. And by the 30th of March to 31st of March 2020, they have to come up with what are the minimum requirements for IoT security. So there are definitely things happening, but as Michelle said, and again this is my opinion, IoT started as a convenience, right? I can turn off my lights from anywhere. I can check my things from overseas, what's happening at home. It started as a convenience for consumer, and
that's only a small component of it.
Correct, right? But it started so fast that I was reading this article that in 2017 we had 8 billion IoT devices, and in 2020 we're going to have 20 billion. 2025 we're going to have 70 billion devices. Now imagine the data that's getting transmitted across the, now what is IoT is doing? They're talking to each other, they're transmitting data. So to answer your question in one respect, yes, we are a bit late to catch up on IoT. And I heard a number of times that people are saying IoT is the future, and I have a different opinion that the future is already here. We've got 20 billion devices in next year. What are we waiting for? Future is already here. We're just late. So yes, there are some. There are things happening from a legislation point of view, but at the same time, from IoT security, it's not just the responsibility of a regulator. It drops down from regulators to manufacturers, from manufacturers to businesses to take a risk-based approach, and to consumers to understand what do they need to do if they buy, for example, if they buy Apple Watch or Google Home. Should they be changing the default password or default settings, or what should be they doing? I lost my thought now. But
answer is yes. Change your default password.
Change your default password, right? But it comes down to the consumer also. So what's missing? What I believe is the user awareness right now, and we need to find a way on how we educate our users. How many people are going to read through your regulations? Right? No one, except businesses. And I always use this this thing called 3UI, which is, where is your device? what is the device doing and what is the data classification of the device is consuming, right? And take the risk-based approach using that 3Y principle I call, but that's my take.
Thank you. Can I come back to the earlier question, comment about moving from a walk to a canter? The answer is yes, in my opinion. The deeper question is about how. How do you actually get a cyber frame of mind into organisations? And from my perspective, it's threefold. It's at an individual level, so you've got to have people inside organisations actually understanding what cyber's about and their role in that. It's about the organisation creating policies, procedures, understanding and awareness. But there's also a government element as well in regards to how to support organisations. Many of the organisations we talk to, particularly in that small to medium-sized sector, are already struggling with running their business. Cyber risk and cyber processes is another challenge that they're faced with. So, how do they actually move forward and work with better in that cyber resiliency? So yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely. We need to move to a trot, but it's about the role that everyone can play in moving that cyber needle.
And I think that there's a really critical role here because, of course, I think we have figured out that one of the key problems in all of this is culture. So it's actually people. To me, the how, to Michael's point, is around the incentive structures. And the incentives, we know, when it comes to areas of uncertainty, endeavours that humans are not comfortable with, and cybersecurity is one of those for the majority of the economy. It works better if we have positive incentives in the first instance and then back it up later with negative incentives if the behaviour hasn't changed. And that's not to say that you shouldn't have regulation or standards to guide people around what good looks like in those behaviours. But I don't think having a big stick right up front is the right incentive in this regard. Now, I'm not necessarily pointing to any existing legislation, although we could. I'm just saying that we often ignore the incentives that drive the right kinds of behaviours. And ultimately, of course, that goes back to the original point that I was making in my opening remarks. This is highly contextual. It means that the incentives that are going to drive me to do the right thing versus the wrong thing are going to be different for what they are to Carl, to Ashish, to Jennifer, to anybody, and Michael, anybody else that's at this table. It's also going to be different for a small business in financial services versus a large business. It's going to be different for a small retailer in a Westfields versus a small retailer that's on a high street. It is really highly contextual. So how do you deal with that complexity? You make sure that you have a baseline of simple, straightforward guidance that people can relate to, and then provide the right kinds of incentives from an economic point of view for people to engage with that and build on it. That does take time, but we do have the right smarts in this country to build that network of incentives. No other country in the world has done it. It could yet be another advantage that we have in the world that we could export.
You mentioned the limitations of the big stick, but we're in an era where the big stick is being wielded, particularly in Europe. You know, we've seen massive fine against Marriott, the biggest one so far against British Airways. When I talk to directors about, and they're guys and the women who sign off on these things, they say, actually that's pretty useful. You can incent me all you like, but the threat of a big fine and potentially going to jail is a much bigger incentive than, you know, you might get a bit of customer awareness. Do you not think that we need both the stick and the carrot?
Well, I think your point is absolutely right. It actually demonstrates that there is context involved in larger organisations versus smaller organisations. So perhaps the incentives need to focus on where in the supply chain the risks exist the most. Because if the behavioural change is going to happen because there's a big stick at the big end of town, I know, absolutely to Michael's point, the big stick is not going to work at the smaller end of town. No matter how much you try to throw those businesses in jail, we actually are removing jobs out of the economy by doing so. That is the wrong incentive for smaller businesses. So how do the bigger businesses, if that's what drives them, how do they then help with the incentives on the positive sense through their supply chains? Where the risks exist the most.
Can I pick up on a couple of ideas there? One is the implication that business is by its nature inert in responding to the threat, which raises some issues around the risk committees in these businesses, and therefore they need that. I was interested in your idea that the sort of road to legislative hell is paved with good intention, and the government responses, because I think the layers of legislation make it very difficult for business to assess how they should be responding. I am a little bit surprised if they're not already trying to address these issues given the level of threat. And I'm interested in why, in consultation with government, business on this particular issue hasn't been as effective in its lobbying in the way it would be if you were trying to put a resource tax or some other punitive measure on top of operation, which we seem to be quite good at sort of blocking. This one, sort of the government seems to roll over the top every time.
Well, my view, and I know other colleagues at the table have got views on this. My view is that it's different because organisations don't believe that they have enough authority, therefore enough knowledge on the complexities of the issues to be able to engage in a practical and meaningful way. So they're actually shying away from that engagement that they otherwise would do on other topics that they're much more familiar with. And so this is absolutely reflective of this sense that it is actually in many ways overly convenient to conceive of cyber risk as an IT risk rather than a business risk, because actually we're more comfortable overall as an economy dealing with it as an IT risk rather than a true risk that it is, which is a holistic business risk.
Yeah.
So I think it's that lack of depth of knowledge in each individual organisation and how that knowledge relates to their environment more broadly that causes them to lack confidence in that conversation. They'd rather say nothing than say something and get it wrong, in my view.
Yeah, the complacency level is still there. Like I spoke at a Law Society of Tasmania event last year, and one of the questions from the audience was, we're a legal firm, we're based in Hobart, the bad guys aren't going to come after me.
Yeah.
So you pause and you have a think about that. And you look at the organisation, they're a large firm, they're transacting millions of dollars through trust accounts, they're involved in IPs and patents. This notion of geographical defence is no longer valid. So there's absolutely, as Michelle said, there's an obligation and an opportunity for organisations to actually help shape what that resiliency looks like, both at an industry sector and a government sector as well. But we've got to come forward very quickly in this notion of moving the complacency needle. There's still a lot of, hey, this won't happen to me, this will happen to the business down the road.
And that's why after 10 years it's the same story, like
And
Mr. Varian was saying.
Yeah, and as Michelle said, look, we're transacting, we're doing a lot more in the application world, we're digitally enabled, so the world that we're in is very different. So absolutely, as I said earlier, there's organisations and government that have taken steps forward, there's organisations and government that still need to be
Same, but
better.
different.
So does that mean that when someone gets up at an AGM and sort of says our business is moving to the cloud and the market applauds and your share price goes up, there's a disconnect between that promise of profitability and managing the risk around that?
Would agree, absolutely. Yeah. And again, there are some sectors who are very good at secure cloud transformation. There are other organisations that we've dealt with who have the notion of, I've got this broken set of applications on premise, if I move them to the cloud, automatically AWS or Azure is automatically going to fix all my problems. So again, there's still a lot of uncertainty and confusion about what's out there. So for us as an organisation who consults and hopefully educates, that's where the focus needs to be. There's still a requirement for a lot of consultation and education into the marketplace about what is this cyber problem, why is it real, why is Australia in the eyes of the bad guys, and also talking about what's happened. As Carl opened up and he talked about his experiences as well. I think there's a great opportunity and a requirement for organisations who have gone through a bad experience to share their insights and actually let organisations know that, hey, this isn't just something I'm reading in the paper, this has an effect on my business, and if we don't get it right, can actually shut my business down before I even know about it. So there's a lot of good that can come out of it.
I think there's landmark lights done that, and it's been punished dramatically by the trust. I mean, it's still suspended.
so.
But it's still suspended from the share market. And were we not in an environment where you have to get a federal court order to be able to issue a class action, chances are those directors could be looking at, time in jail.
So bouncing off that, do we reach a point where some of these companies will just go, fuck them, you haven't learnt in 10 years, Darwinian selection, send a few people to jail. I'm a big fan of the stick in those cases. They should know this by now.
There's always going to be organisations who won't come along on the journey. So our role is to try and make things better for the greater good.
The greater good would be to weed them out of the population, wouldn't it?
You can look at it in various ways.
Oh, that's eugenics, corporate eugenics.
Well, the hard thing about it, just listening to the conversation in here, it's one of those very few crimes in the world where the victim gets blamed. And that's what's difficult about speaking of it. You come out in public and you want to impart some knowledge and try and help people improve, but they look at you in a negative light, saying, well, you've been hacked, you're at fault, you should have prepared better, you should have done this, you should have done that. If somebody really wants to target me, they're going to target me, and that's what they did. So it's very hard to speak about it, and a lot of organisations, as the other example we got here, they try to speak about it and they get crucified for it. I think we need to be better at listening to people who've been through the experience and learning. What I've seen, there's probably not a lot of collaboration in the space as well. Everybody's sort of doing their own thing, and there's a bit of a reluctance to get together and take a more holistic view about solving the problems as well. For that reason, everybody's very secretive about it. Our security posture this, and we're doing this, and we want to keep it all to ourselves. If we take a more collaborative approach, I think that would help as well. There's a couple of sort of insights from what I went through as well. But I still go into boards today. I've had someone recently say to me, "Hey mate, stop telling me all this stuff. It's exactly word for word. Just tell me how much money I need to throw at this to make it go away."
Yep.
So there's still a lot of pushback at that level, but that's unfair to a lot of other organisations that are embracing it and taking steps towards sorting things out. And then as you push down that supply chain as well, one of the other things I'm seeing is that larger organisations now who are dealing with potentially thousands of smaller companies as part of their business. They could be one-man bands or they could be significant enterprises. They're putting the same security requirements down onto them to deal with them in the future. So I had a company recently saying, I've just received a questionnaire from a major corporate about my security posture. They want me to get ISO accreditation. And that's a $150,000 exercise for a company that turns over, $100,000 a year. So the organisation need to get better at, as Michelle said before, it's not that cookie cutter approach, and that's where it gets complex. It's about understanding that supply chain. What is it? What is the product and service that you're providing me? What is really at risk? How do I get you to provide the right controls that are relevant to what you're doing for me? So it's getting better. At the moment, it's sort of a little bit too sort of cookie cutter. A couple of little.
I think it's also important to highlight that, back to my comment earlier about the confusion and complacency side, the confusion of where do I go for help in this area. Michelle can grab this baton, I know she thinks I know where I'm going. We've got a great ecosystem in Australia of organisations who can help. I get very frustrated when a lot of organisations turn overseas because they think that's where the solution is. We have a great network of organisations, mine included, that can work with local business. I stress the importance of don't always turn overseas. There's 300 or so organisations that Aussie is now working with at various levels of capability enablement in market. So we have a very robust ecosystem of organisations who are in Australia who can help anything from a one-man band through to government. So I stress the importance of Australian businesses to look locally to see how they can help shape the future of cyber in Australia.
How do you think you bring together one-man bands with people who can provide those services? Because reaching those organisations for
You're
a
saying there's
provider
300
is
in
very
Australia?
costly.
Do you want to comment on just the work in your
Yeah, so
ecosystem?
we estimate that overall there's around about 500 Australian cybersecurity companies in the economy. Cyber's looking after just over 300 of them. And the only reason why we're not looking after the other sort of 200 odd is because we simply haven't gotten to them yet. Those companies are, in varying degrees of maturity, as Michael noted. But we have around about 80 of them are what we consider to be high-performing, globally competitive companies that are right now exporting what they do, whether they be products and or services, to the world. And we've got a sort of a top 40, if you like, for those who are children of the 80s, you'll know my reference there. And that top 40, it's like globally.
Do yourself a favour and have a look.
That's right.
Bring it moving the thing, put my hat on.
That's right, put the hat on. It's kind of within the ecosystem referred to as Cyber's top 40. And there's movement within that top 40 all the time. But within that top 40, we have some companies that are delivering globally unique capability. And part of my role is to actually champion to the economy that those capabilities exist and how they can be used by local organisations, whether they be the one-man band or one-gal band, right through to the largest employers in the country. And this is, there's so much wrapped up in that. We are starting to see in the economy again a removal of the stigma associated with innovation. And I note, of course, colleagues, that we are today competing with the AFR Innovation Summit, which is running for its 5th year in a row. There's some really interesting articles, of course, being published by the AFR and some of the discussion that's going on there over the last 2 days. But we are losing some of that stigma. We are starting to understand, certainly in the younger generations, that it absolutely is awesome to be an entrepreneur, because actually the economy was built on entrepreneurship. The fact that we have 96% of our economy as small businesses is true to this day. 96% of our economy employs less than 19 people in their businesses, and they are exporting every single day. And the overwhelming majority of those businesses do not have boards, they do not have risk committees, they do not have finance committees, they do not have the governance structures that we focus all of our regulation and legislation on. But we know that ultimately the message that needs to be delivered to Australian organisations, and I say organisations, not business, because this is just as important for academia and government as what it is for industry. They are enterprises too, in their own right, is that no one else in the world, and I have spent a lot of time internationally understanding what innovation for cybersecurity looks like, how it feels and how you get it done. No one else in the world partners like Australian cybersecurity capability. Why is that? Because we are not transactional, we do it based on relationship, which means we care about the context of our customer more than anybody else in the world. The other factor is that nobody else has is local knowledge of our economy, like us locals do. And so yes, if you go overseas, you might feel like you're getting a more authoritative outcome, but actually this is when we run into problems of sustainment, because that provider actually not only doesn't understand the context of the business or the organisation, they also don't care about it. Now there are exceptions to that, that is a generalisation, but overall, frankly friends, they don't care. Local companies do, and that is what our economy was built on. So those are the messages that we like to send. There are enormous benefits from partnering with Australian cybersecurity capability to be able to help the sole trader make a start, to be able to drive forward the capability of our most pointy-ended endeavours, like protecting the nation in a battlefield and everything in between. Those capabilities exist right here at home right now, and I'm obviously intensely proud of it. I will never shy away from being so, because we do need to celebrate that. That's what we need more than ever, is to celebrate local capability.
Is that the hurrah?
It is. Hear, hear.
In that context, Michelle, can I just pick up on, you talked about a trust deficit earlier on. Can you just elaborate on between whom, where that trust problem is?
It's widespread. So I guess in a commercial context, whether you're a government agency or you're an academic institution, there's been a few that have had reported breaches. There's one as recently as yesterday, if you missed that in the news, University of Western Australia. As well as businesses. We have this sense that we can't trust something unless somebody else has used it before us. So there's an interesting commercial reality there. But actually, that someone else doesn't have the same context as me, so that's kind of the logic doesn't work. But overall, we also have this trust deficit, I think, around what the nature of cybersecurity actually is. And this is the very live nature of what I refer to as the grey zone. And other organisations at this table, the speakers, we've all had discussions about this, about the grey zone. These are individuals who have really, really sharp skills in the technical space of cybersecurity that do play the dark side and the light side. This is really, really challenging for all organisations to come to terms with, because that's ultimately what the law tries to defend against when it comes to cybersecurity, are black hatters, people who are dark hackers. But actually those skills that get applied in those environments are exactly the types of skills that we need to defend against that. So this grey zone that we have, where we don't know how to trust whether or not somebody's advice, somebody's product, somebody's service is actually the right fit and can be trusted in its deployment, means that even more so organisations who are not involved in the day-to-day of cybersecurity right now get really anxious about how to engage with the endeavour. So what we try to do is act as a bit of an independent filter of that, because we vet all of the companies that come into our ecosystem. Each of them get the Michelle ruler applied across the top of them, and I can tell you, Michael knows, it's harsh. You actually I go to a lot to understand whether or not an organisation is legitimate or not. And every now and again, of course, in the future, it hasn't happened yet, I'll make a mistake, but most of the time I haven't made a mistake yet. Organisations in the economy can come to us and get trusted advice around who they need to use. And there are other organisations where if you trust them, you can do the same. And Telstra provides an amazing service in that regard as well. And I know it because I've vetted it.
And sorry, how often do you vet these companies? Because we have seen the example of Chrome extensions that are good, and then they get bought out by the criminals, and suddenly they're sucking all the data off your computer.
Absolutely.
And that's very different in one sense, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the organisations within the AustCyber ecosystem are getting vetted actually all the time.
Yeah.
And there's a whole range of different activities that we do to actually achieve that. To be able to engage with any of the services that we deliver to help them grow, they get vetted every time they want to get access to one of those services. So every time we take a trade delegation overseas, for example, they get vetted. But any of the services that we deliver. But also I've got a huge network, as you can probably imagine, across the economy of buyers and investors and users that I'm constantly in contact with. So not only do I have my own eyes and ears, I've actually got a whole army of people across the world who are watching out for me as well, and they do report. Because of course, Australians love to throw a brick harder than anybody else on the planet. So we love to find things that are wrong with things, but also some of our colleagues internationally do too. So I'm constantly getting messages. I mean, everybody knows I'm hard to get. That's actually why, because I'm constantly responding to messages from people globally that are giving me insights as to whether or not we should be keeping a company within our ecosystem or to kick them out.
And have you
kicked two out.
I was going to say, yeah.
I have kicked two out. I will not name who they are. One of them their entity no longer exists because they actually weren't able to get customers. And so to the point that Still was making earlier, do we toss these companies out of the economy? Yeah, we kind of do, but we don't do it in a public way. We don't do it in a way that names and shames, because there's context with all of this. And people are still human at the end of the day. You know, there's still empathy here. Actually did a podcast recently on empathetic leadership. I think we need a bit more of it in the economy. But you know, so this is, and I sort of say, I'll give to you, and I know that some of you have heard this before, but why is it that you can then trust AustCyber? Why can you do that?
Yeah, why can you do that, Michelle?
Can you do that?
Jeez.
Apart from the fact that I'm awesome, there is also the fact that AustCyber is an independent organisation. We are deliberate in only taking public money. So we are 98% funded by the federal government and 2% funded by the states and territories. as part of our network of nodes. We do not take any money from anyone outside of that equation.
Must
But
be on the government.
so, but then I'd say, and then comma, in the contracts that I have with governments, plural, around the country, we agree on the what, but they cannot tell me the how, and they don't tell me the why. We determine what that is. And so when I get asked, but surely you have vested interests, I'm like, dead straight, I have vested interests. My vested interests are for the country. And I've demonstrated that time and time and time again. And I've also been able to repel all efforts to try and turn me against my own country. So, you know, I think that those credentials are there, they're transparent. And my board and I are very, very keen to make sure that we retain that independence so that people can trust the advice that we give into the economy.
So Michelle, who are the criminals that you're most afraid of and looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, when we see, I mean, you know, Jen and I see stuff every day that's pretty fierce. So you can get a little bit jaded by how fierce it can feel to a target when there's been a successful incident or attack, and that attacker has been a lone wolf who might be 14 years old. That can feel like it was Russia coming down on your ton of bricks. Like, it really can, right? Carl felt that the day that he figured out that he no longer had a business because an attacker who was persistent ended his business. I'm sure, Carl, that felt like you. That was Russia.
But it ended up being an Australian.
Indeed. Yeah. So, you know, it's again, it's contextual. But the ones for me, absolutely, there are some organised. They're all criminals, right? They're all breaking our version of the law. So let's refer to them as criminals, and some of them are nation states. But the ones that terrify me the most are actually probably the ones that we talk least about, and they are the ones that are absolutely networked beyond how we conceive of being networked. These are nation states that are working in collaboration with organised criminal syndicates to have their own version of a networked supply chain of data that can be manipulated in a gajillion ways. Technical term. They're the ones that terrify me because they are so agile, they are so responsive, and more importantly, I guess, for our conception, they are proactive because they've got their business plan, they've got their business model, they do evolve their technology, their tools, their skills, they are in formalised training environments, they are using us as their training field, they do test the boundaries of what our tolerances are every day. That's their plan. They're the ones that scare me most.
Would Cyber ever admit to being hacked if it was?
Absolutely, we would.
And have you been?
No, we have not. And we do test regularly.
So are you saying that Australia is where you come to practice before you take on a larger market?
Well, in part, yeah. Yeah.
That's been demonstrated previously, especially in cybercrime, that some attackers would use Australia as a bit of a testing ground.
Tasmanian law firms, that sort of thing.
Well, right, potentially.
Geography's no longer an excuse.
They're always early adopters in
Because
Australia.
we've got a very high wealth per capita, so we're a lucrative target, and and a sort of smaller environment to test it, and possibly not seen as advanced and hard, and not historically having been out there as much as the FBI sort of take down this criminal group, so where they might push them away to shy away from targets.
So, Jen, to pick up on your notion earlier about the KPIs, how much of it is, in the business model, how much of it is sort of stealing corporate IP? Then there's probably sort of the rival black ops where if I take down my competitor, massive win, got the market to myself. And then there's of course the bit that everyone is incredibly conscious of and obviously legislation is wrapped around, which is the customer database. What's the split between sort of the corporate theft and sort of the database sort of theft?
I can't say that I would have percentages, but I think that sort of greys out, well, to use that term, but to use it more in what Michelle was just talking about there in terms of those proxy groups almost, and those cybercrime, combination cybercrime, working for big organisations that may also potentially be state-backed. That's where, then the objectives that they have could have quite a wide reach across multiple industry sectors. Right down to...
Well, we've seen the DOD moments where sort of they're jumping into people's, for from a nation state to sort of get that IP. But I'm just sort of wondering how much of it is going to be in the future a corporate thing.
Well, corporates are that is your national infrastructure. That is your security of your economy. That if you can have the right pressure points across the economy, then even if it's not to steal data and to take intellectual property and use that to innovate and get ahead in your own country with your own competitiveness, even to quietly place a few pressure points that later you might want to use. Politically, there's that angle too.
There'll always be different goals.
Yeah.
The bad guys are after different things. Go back a couple of years ago, it was credit card information. Nowadays, it's healthcare records. What it is in 12 months' time, who knows?
Direct implant into your brain.
So why the shift from credit card to healthcare?
Just the value of the data on the dark web. That's what it's about. The other problem that we need to face also, and I touched on it earlier, is the insider threat. Now, a lot of organisations have people who are trying to do good for their business. We had a recent breach earlier this week, late last week, with one of the banks, and it's been attributed at this moment to an insider error. That's, to me, where the greatest benefit can be attained in the next 6 or 12 months is actually getting those individuals to actually understand and accept their role in moving the cyber resiliency of their business. We see it through the mandatory breach legislation notifications. We see it every week in various reports here locally and internationally. A large percentage of breaches are still are insider based, so we've got to focus on that. And the notion I use is there's no good locking the front door if you've got the back door open, and that's what we've got to focus on. We've got to get the back door locked as well, and the back door is the internal education of the staff and take them on the journey.
Is that you designing a pop-up screen that goes, you're about to be an idiot, are you sure you want to be an idiot right now, yes or no? Or, I mean, human error is just one of those really random things that everyone throws.
Human error means the design is wrong, but allows the human to make the error.
I think too, if you my perception, my opinion is, if you start collecting data, what's been happening across the globe, and what are the soft targets? Phishing is one of them. If you look at notification breach, from 1st of Jan to 31st, there's been maximum attacks been phishing, right? I'll be loud. Then if you go through the Internet Crime Report for 2018, that's phishing. This is the target. Now, surely people can collate that data and can see, okay, what are the soft targets for us? Where do we need to act on it? And probably do a reverse engineering. Okay, how did they get there? Somebody clicked on, on a malicious email. So, okay, do we need user awareness practices there or policies? Yes, we do. As Michael said, with the bank, it was insider, human error. With Western Sydney, University of Western Australia, the laptop was stolen. The first question I asked myself is, why do you have 30 years of data on a laptop? Right? What is that doing, and why do you don't have that data encrypted? Right? That's now. This morning I read another thing where a company in Europe called Sure, one of the users clicked on a malicious email and the data got compromised, right? So we have the patterns there. What are we doing? Now that's where the risk approach comes in place. And I often say to people that security exposure is something can be understood by technical people. If I say there's a SQL injection or there's a phishing attack, yes, we can be understood. But you need to translate that security exposure into risk framework. So you can actually table that to the management saying, okay, if we don't fix this issue, there's a brand reputation impact. Are we doing that? I'm not sure, right? If you start doing that, if you start tabling it to the right person, you start seeing the value out of that risk management approach, which we all talk about.
Michelle Irwin, sorry.
So you said, on everything, you talked about legislation, but the consumer data are currently going through Parliament. What's your thoughts? Is it enough? And will the financial services actually be able to get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I note that the P has dropped out of the title of the legislation now. When it was first tabled in Parliament, I had a conversation with the chair of the Productivity Commission about the work they had done, which was really the engine room of the development of that legislation. And it was my view that actually from accepting that privacy and security are two sides of the same coin, that they actually work in concert with each other, not against each other, that legislation was actually absolutely world-leading. It went so much further than GDPR, and that was because it actually put the true human at the centre of the legislation and considered around that human what all of the different touch points would be for the organisations that human would be engaging with at any given moment during the day or night. And I think what we've seen over the iterations of its consideration by Parliament is some adjustment that may have removed some of that sense of how connected human-centred data is to all different types of systems and providers, and the way that systems and providers interact with each other. So where we're at now with it is that I think it actually does go far enough when we take it in concert with the other pieces of legislation that are in play and being considered. And I'll note here, of course, that being journalists, you will have read at least the executive summary. I've not read the whole report, just the executive summary of the chairman of the ACCC's report into digital platforms, and the ramifications that, if those recommendations are accepted, the ramifications that that's going to have for reform to the Privacy Act. They are sweeping, and they directly impact cybersecurity and privacy, obviously, because it's the Privacy Act, but it's actually building in security requirements into the Privacy Act. I think this is a good thing. So I don't think that the CPR should go any further than what it is, because if it goes any further, I think it will start to impinge on and sort of, I guess, negatively interact with the achievement of what can be done in other parts of legislation. So again, there's the point about making sure that we look at things holistically and not in a silo. Because if we had no other legislation dealing with security or privacy, then sure, CPR does not go far enough. But when we look at it in totality, yes, I think it does. But let's not shave off anything more from it as part of it gets amended on the way through.
Every time the data notification breaches come out, I think it's normally financial institutions just below healthcare.
That's right.
I mean, obviously, there's more financial gain from a financial institution, but do the big banks and our financial institutions know what they're doing? Like, are they aware of it?
I think they are aware of it. I think what they haven't had yet time to appreciate is how their role in it, how that the responsibilities that they have, given that they were the target of the first pilot, how that then interacts with the responsibilities of the platform providers, like a Telstra, for example, and the infrastructure providers rather. Telstra as an infrastructure provider rather than a platform provider. But I think that there hasn't yet been enough time, and that was not the terms of reference of the pilot, unfortunately, to look at the way in which that the information value chain around that operates. So there is an opportunity, if Parliament wants to go further with another pilot before we land on this, I think that's the space to focus on. Because of course, financial services are also dealing with a Royal Commission outcome. They're also dealing with changes to regulation out of ASIC and APRA. This is not to say that they shouldn't have to deal with all of these things at the same time, but if they have to deal with them all at the same time, then let's look at this being in the wild. Let's look at the reality of these things in play as though they were in play, rather than thinking that they're fictitious and, we won't put in the effort to go right down to the last letter of Z to understand what this looks like in operation, because actually we don't have to worry about that for another 10 years. Rubbish, we need to understand that now.
I might ask just a general question. As we go into the future, we are talking about IoT. We're starting to move towards autonomous vehicles in that area, and suddenly the control of devices is taken out of our hand, and we can be at risk. I know, Shishi, I think you've got some views around this particular area yourself.
That's quite debatable. So, driverless cars, they're getting built. So there was a couple of scenarios been discussed or shared in one of the discussions where if you're in a driverless car and there are children that comes in front of the car, what should the car do? Should it turn left where they're oncoming cars, or should it turn right where pedestrians walking, or there are houses? So what it should do?
Or should it kill you?
That's what I thought.
That's
what I
that's
thought.
the ethical question.
So the because as humans, when we are driving, we've got millions of things we process. You know, when should we brake? Where should we turn? Do we have that artificial intelligence built in the driverless cars? I don't think so at this stage. So
Despite what Elon Musk says.
in Germany, what they said is the idea behind driverless car is to save number of people. So irrespective of age, irrespective of if there's a kid in front of the car and you know that there are oncoming traffic, there's a kid. Or if there are animals, in the animal, right? So it's about saving lives. You have to sacrifice one, yes, and that's where the question comes about ethics and how soon can we see that driverless cars on the road, it's just mind-boggling. When I read through the driverless cars, it's something. When it comes, we'll see what happens, but it's a challenge for the community.
And then we're going to pilotless aircraft and whatever else.
I see who's going to get an Uber chopper in Melbourne.
That's right.
Or based on that possibility.
It's the next wave of confusion and so yeah, it's your question earlier still about 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This is an evolution. We're in a world where things are changing constantly. IoT, driverless technologies, devices, etc. It's an evolving world, and again, a lot of organisations also think cyber is about, okay, I've done my check this year, I'm okay for the next 12 months. It's like a doctor's checkup. Well, it can't be. You've got to move the notion of cyber has to be an active, real-time program that works inside your business. So again, what the world looks like in 12 months from a driverless area, IoT devices. We've got to make sure that we're embedding this into our day-to-day. As I said earlier, it's got to be part of the DNA of a business. It can't be a set and forget. It can't be a 12-month tick box.
That's a very hard thing for a small business to get that sort of DNA, though, isn't it?
Oh, I agree. I agree. And there's a role that everyone needs to play. The individuals inside the business and government need to play.
I think the industry and the vendors need to do more. I got the NBN the other day, and the router was shipped with the default admin password. Admin password was admin. No suggestion as to change it at all. You could just plug it in and leave it, and it's sitting there vulnerable. And then it's not a big deal for the supplier to make more effort to make that more secure, but they don't do it.
But that's what's coming through the legislation in UK. That's what they're trying to pass. So
what are we doing here? Are we doing anything here?
I think there was, and Michelle, probably you can help. There was some talks about putting some IoT ranking. I don't know where that is, but I think it's been shelved.
That got shelved when Minister Tian was no longer the cyber minister.
Oh, God damn it.
Doesn't mean it won't get unchecked.
But it was still a move in the right direction. It's not that something going to solve the problem for us, but yes, it was a step towards it.
It's probably more of a perennial problem than what people think. I mean, I don't know if anyone's heard about the stories about John Deere tractors. There's like a $500,000 tractor, and they've all got the same key. Right? So fast forward to the apparently you can, like, if you've got a John Deere tractor key, you can go and steal any tractor, just go for a joyride, any tractor anywhere in the world. But fast forward to IoT and the routers that ship with admin, they all have the same password, right?
$1 million worth of kit.
Yeah. So is it a problem of us as consumers not demanding enough security or
Well,
default security in these products?
Most customers aren't sufficiently educated to know. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's true. It comes down to the education, and I'll probably take two examples here, which is a good side of IoT and a bad side of IoT. But, in South Korea, they've installed IoT meters, the water meters, right? And it's to track the old age people. So if they've not used the water for X number of days or X number of hours, then they send somebody in that remote area to check if the people are still there or not, or if something wrong has happened. So that's a good story. Now it can very well turn into a bad story when somebody actually knows things. But on the other side, there were two people, two guys were in Austria. They were on some drug dose from hospital, and they had the IoT device implanted. they went to the midwife said, "Can you please increase the dose because I'm not feeling comfortable. I need to, you know, I'm still in pain." Doctors knows what they're doing, but these guys they're probably techie. So what they did, they went on the internet, went to the manufacturer's website, got the username and password, logged onto the device, increased the dosage. Within half an hour, they started feeling short-breath. So they had to go back to the hospital for examination. So there are good and a bad side of IoTs. You know, the password thing, if you look at the top 10 vulnerabilities of IoT, password is one of them, right? Device management is one of them. Physical security of those IoTs is one of them. Just remember one thing, IoT is got a very small form factor of chip. It can only do a little bit, right? So it can, and what you see right now is, what you see now.
Sorry, I'm just not looking at my phone and thinking depends on how small we're talking.
Exactly, I agree. But what I'm saying is, now things have changed over the time. But IoT, the other thing is, IoT's got a bigger lifespan. I bought a D-Link camera in 2011. It's still working. Right?
Still sending its video somewhere.
It is, exactly, somewhere. Yeah,
Somewhere.
Right? That's a point. So.
That long lifespan is going to be a real problem. I
It
think.
is, and you can't do a retrofit.
Yeah.
So even if you have new manufacturers or new chipset, you can't do a retrofit. So consumer has to come up with, you know, put a break saying, okay, I'm going to throw this IoT device and go and buy a new one because this new one is more secure. Having said that, to make that choice, your consumer or user needs to be across, you know, what's good and bad.
And yet you haven't bought a new camera yourself.
No, I haven't.
Have you updated the firmware?
No, it's in the shelf. So.
Can I ask a question? I guess my question is probably firstly for Jennifer and then for everyone. What are the main cybersecurity threats at Telstra in the now and in the future? What do you see as the challenges in 5G, which is probably for everyone, and also for everyone, do they agree with the Huawei ban? In study on the
Over to you, Jennifer.
I mean, I think, you know, in terms of threats to the threats that we've kind of talked about are threats across the whole of the economy. In terms of sort of balancing the opportunities with you know, technology evolution, I'll go back to what Ashish has been saying about IoT. Obviously that's huge for Telstra, and of course, you know, devices are connecting to our network. That number of devices connecting is just going to increase and increase and increase. So it really makes us think about, okay, you know, trust. Like, what's the level of trust on already we have devices roaming from all, you know, constantly roaming on and off the network. That's just, you know, we provide that facility, right? So it's really about, okay, is there an increased risk with the increased number of devices? How do we look at managing that, and how do we still enable that really massive benefit of interconnectedness in, for example, into remote areas that 5G is going to provide? How do we make sure that security is baked in as much as it can be in enabling that?
I can answer
that's
the
our
question.
focus.
I can answer the question as to whether Telstra trusts Huawei. You only have to look to see what they do. For years you had the advanced 4G hotspots, and they were made by Netgear. But your most recent one, for $120 in any Telstra store, which I bought for a friend the other day, it's made by Huawei. Now that's not good or bad. It just is.
Yeah, that's an end user device. Again, like I say,
Still?
anything can come on and off our network
Yeah.
without us.
But if you didn't trust them, you wouldn't sell it. Let's put it that way.
For me, the threat is not where the threat is coming from. It's what it's attacking. You look at breaches, 60% of all breaches still stem from an application attack. So the notion of DevSecOps is where there's great opportunity for us to build cyber resiliency. We're seeing that through what we're doing in TAFE and other areas of actually educating security into the development process. We live in an application and API-enabled world. That's not going to change. Unfortunately, the apps and APIs that underpin that world at the moment haven't been developed securely. So for me, let's tighten that. Let's get security embedded into development programs, and that's where you'll see a significant resiliency come into the world of cyber.
And if I may, on the Huawei decision, it's not our place to, to voice opinions on either side of what a decision is. But obviously, there's a government, effectively a government directive on that. So for us, it's very clear. We follow the direction of the government and comply with their advice, and we respect the quality of their technical, the technical expertise that's gone into that decision. But we can't be having our opinions or positions.
Yeah, that one's for everyone.
Well, I'm happy to offer an opinion, of course. So I think that the key thing that colleagues might have missed in what was announced by the government, and it was through the person who ultimately has to wear the impact of that decision, and that's the head of the ASD, Mike Burgess. What he actually said in the discussion, as he, in the speech that he gave when they made the announcement, it's high-risk providers. Now, the economy has suddenly, we've figured out how to save Huawei, and we know that there's been problems with Huawei, not just in Australia but globally, and problems that have caused national security agencies to really have very deep consideration about the nature of not only how they operate as an organisation and their relationship to the Chinese government, but also up until very recently, and actually in Australia because of the way that their supply chain works, the quality of what they've been producing. I've certainly experienced that direct hand, and I'm, happy to say publicly, it's rubbish. That's not to say that there isn't rubbish going on in being manufactured by other companies that are domiciled in other countries. But what Mike actually said that day was high-risk providers. And he did name a series of organisations, of which Huawei was one. It was actually the media that focused on Huawei and not any of the others. So to be fair, my comment is that I do know firsthand how much consideration goes into these kinds of discussions, and it actually is one of the areas where I can say with 100% certainty that the commercial realities associated with those kinds of decisions are taken into consideration. And it's about the security of the nation. It's not about whether or not we are providing any kind of protectionist behaviour to any of our organisations locally, because we ain't got no competitors in that market. That's the point as to why 5G has become such a big issue globally, is because like-minded countries have figured out that we sold off the ability to be able to manufacture at home a long time ago. This didn't just happen yesterday, although I might note that maybe the economy just woke up to it. But so yeah, I think that high-risk vendors, it's not just Huawei. There are many others of concern in there, and there's been other governments around the world, and not just Five Eyes governments. Many European countries have also been very public, and they've gone further than what we have in stating that not only the companies that they're concerned about, but also the countries and regimes that they are linked to. The US government recently identified Kaspersky and the Russian government. So this is not just to do with Chinese providers either. So I think that's really important context. I actually really genuinely do. But if the government is coming out with these kinds of decisions, they really genuinely do, in this particular sort of space of decision making, the checks and balances in these are actually pretty extreme. And so it's not taken lightly.
And can I just ask regarding the Huawei equipment, was that a modem router or one of the smart? Yeah, because I mean, I've got a friend who's got a therapeutic massage business in Canberra on iiNet. It's got a Huawei modem. I think it's been there for 3 or 4 years, and the modem works, but the Wi-Fi is dead. And it shouldn't have died. But from the point of view of their phones are good. I guess it must be two different divisions internally.
Well, I think that
that are making it.
I think the point there is that that's when it's not actually a security issue when the device isn't performing as it's manufactured to perform. That's an ACCC issue.
Yeah.
Like, quite seriously, it's not a
Well,
security
it's beyond
issue.
its warranty in that case. It's you get a 1 or 2 year warranty, and after 3 or 4 years, well, any number of routers can have that problem. But But I mean, it was disappointing that that particular part had failed because the staff, they use the Wi-Fi when they're not performing their duties, and you know, we had to replace to save the time on figuring out the password and username. We just plugged in another router and got Wave 2 AC out of 211, Wi-Fi, which was much better anyway. So, but yeah, I was curious to know which Huawei device, and yeah.
Nothing's really said. One of the documents that was leaked by Edward Snowden was an internal NSA newsletter where they had photographs where they were boasting about putting back doors into Cisco gear. And I remember being at a Cisco event once and asking Cisco about this, and they said, yes, we now route stuff via intermediate addresses so that the NSA doesn't actually know where it's going. So it's not just the Chinese government; they're all at it basically.
Yeah.
Might be asking questions if they do. Taxpayers.
Yeah, that's what I'm exactly saying when I say that I know that the adversary, whoever we decide the adversary is, has a strategy, because I've been the adversary, for them. And you've got things that you're trying to achieve, and you're trying to understand what's out there and what the vulnerabilities are, and that's you'd hope that we've got just as good or better quality defending us as is attacking us, wouldn't you?
So, not sure if anybody's got any other questions. Believe it or not, we've been talking.
Is there any key talking points you had there?
No, I think I've covered most of them. The only sort of general question I want to put out there is that, right back to the start, the question about, are we doing enough? Are we sort of failing? What more can organisations do? Just a general question for anybody. What can organisations do to use security as a sales enabler? Actually get proactive about security. And so maybe just some of the tips for organisations on how they can be better at selling their security posture.
Well, I think that in the first instance, to be able to use it as a point of difference in the market, they've got to be able to demonstrate that they've got cyber resilience within their own organisation. So that's both a technical endeavour as well as a human endeavour. And when I say the human side, it's as much about business strategy as it is about a commitment to culture. So if you're going to use it as a point of difference, you've got to be able to, back it up, because again, Australians like no other love to throw a brick. It attracts attention.
Your customer.
Well, if you're able to demonstrate that you've got cyber resilience built into your organisation, then actually it's about forming a narrative around that. It's a story, and it's not just claiming that you have cyber security in place and that you're the most secure organisation in your market segment. That's not enough. In fact, actually, people see straight through that.
It's about living it, not just having it as an afterthought, as it has been for the last 50 years.
Being able to demonstrate it by applying the use case to potential customers.
How do you do that? Because I think back to the 90s, and everyone used to stick a little red QA badge on their business as proof of sort of the standards that they were operating at. There's no sort of standards association thing that you can do around cybersecurity at this point in time? Can we get there?
I must admit, I do like the idea of the cyber scoring type system that's been floated.
You're in a restaurant, you've got 5 stars outside or whatever.
It's 3 hats.
You have a score associated to the cyber.
Michelle and I conversed about 6 months ago, and I raised this notion of HeartSmart. Remember you go to the store, you see the HeartSmart logo. I said, how do you actually get small to medium-sized business having some sort of cyber smart logo on their business to actually accelerate their ability in the supply chain? So, but to your question, what are we doing? Are we doing enough? I think if anyone says we are doing enough, then they've lost the battle. This is an evolution. We don't know what the next 3 to 5 years is going to look like. This has to be continual. I think it's a great opportunity also for organisations, small, medium and large, and government, to actually share some of their war stories. It doesn't need to be in the open forum, absolutely, but what's working for an organisation can assist their organisation down the road. I think we've got to move from this competitive nature. If you are seeing something which has hit your business, or you've done something in your business that has worked, share those insights with the industry. I think that's a great way to actually mature what we are doing. But yeah, don't say we've got it right, because as soon as you've got it right, the bad guys have...
Well, the moment you put your sticker of security approval, it's out of date.
You've got to continually improve what you're doing.
Yeah, personally, I like that idea. gets put together and evolves is something, but it's certainly something worth having a look at.
And it's about having a cross-section of people in your organisation or who are solving the problem that's the same as the cross-section of people in society that you're trying to solve the problem for. Instead of thinking, oh, the user needs this, or the user wants this experience, or try and have those people as part of your team so that they can bring that difference.
Well, just on that, I mean, it used to be that security was something you had security guys, but now security is the entire business, because without it, you don't have a business. You'll be out of business very, very soon.
And security's become a trust-based decision. So you go and talk to organisations that they will deal with organisations that they trust, and organisations are moving their business. I know Telstra's on that journey as well. They want to be seen as a provider of security-related services in markets. Our role is to absolutely empower organisations that when they do have a challenge and they are confronted with something in the cyber world, that they will actively come up and say, hey, I don't have the answers for this. I need some help. How do we actually go on that journey?
Well, I think that's a pretty good summary. Wrap up for the session. I think we'll probably leave it at that. But whilst we're having coffee and finishing up desserts, by all means, continue the discussions. But a thank you to all the panellists today. Round of applause. Thanks.